Welcome to today's debate. It's another public debate, this time on the issue of AI and copyright. And this is sponsored by the Center for AI and the Liberal Arts here at University of Mary Washington. We're really excited about this one. I see some familiar faces there at the first debate that we had and also with the guest speaker. And it'll be really interesting to see what you think about this format and what you think about this debate topic. The resolution for today is that resolved training AI works without permission violates copyright law. And so a really interesting, focused discussion that I think, as you're going to learn, is a very complicated issue. And there's a lot here that we all need to learn from about this. Let me say a little bit about the format, and then I'll introduce the introductory speaker and then the debaters, and then we'll get started. For the format, we'll have opening speeches from both of the debaters, the affirmative debater for about 5 minutes, and then the negative debater for about 5 minutes. Then they will have 5 minutes to ask each other questions, and there'll be some cross-examination and have questions back and forth. Then we're going to open it up to questions and comments from all of you, and we'll have about 20-25 minutes of time for questions and discussion from you. Please note that this event is being video recorded, and we will make the video publicly available. So if you really don't want to be included in the video, then you might not want to ask it publicly there, or if you want to write it down and be able to share it with one of us, and one of us can ask it for you, be happy to do that too. But we'll have about 20-25 minutes for audience discussion, and then we'll bring it back for closing speeches from the affirmative speaker and the negative speaker, each about 4 minutes long, to kind of wrap it up, to be able to give some conclusions, some reflections, and some remarks about the topic. At that point, we will have the second survey posted, and we'll have the link for you to be able to give us your opinion on the topic, about the debate, and any other feedback you might have. And then we'll be able to share the results and talk about the results between the two, so you can see how the pre-debate survey compared to the post-debate survey, and we'll have a few concluding remarks from the debaters to talk about their own positions on this. I want to thank them for being willing to participate in the debate. As most of you know, with debates, we often have to take a little more strident position, a little more extreme position than we might otherwise believe, and it might be completely different than our own beliefs. But the benefit of doing that is that we can test ideas. So we can really look at good arguments, the best arguments possible on one side of the issue, and then compare them to the best arguments possible on the other side of the issue. So it's not an easy task. It's not something that is necessarily easy for anybody to jump into, because obviously the position is more nuanced. And so the debaters will be able to share a little bit about their own personal opinion on these topics after the conclusion of the debate. Until then, they're going to be role-playing as a more extreme version of the arguments on both sides of the issue, so that we'll be able to test those ideas and be able to experiment with it a little bit. I do want you to keep that in mind when we get to the audience discussion. It's important to focus on the issues, the arguments. These are not necessarily positions that are forwarded by the individual, and true for all of us. We're really just trying to explore, to learn more about these issues, and it's just a good chance to be able to be better informed, and that's really the goal of today. Not to resolve anything. I don't know that we could resolve it. Some of the biggest courts in the land haven't been able to resolve these issues. So we're not going to be able to in the next hour and a half, but we're certainly going to learn a lot about this. So let me introduce the speakers for the debate today. The affirmative speaker, the affirmative side, is represented by Professor Matthew Franks, who's a professor of religion in the Department of Cultural and Philosophical Inquiry, over on my far right. Round of applause for Professor Franks. Thank you. And then on the negative side of the debate is Professor Evan Coleman, who's Assistant Professor of Computer Science. Round of applause for Professor Coleman. Now, at this time, I'm very pleased to welcome my colleague, the University Librarian Amy Filiatro, who will give some introductory remarks to talk a bit about copyright. There's a lot here that we need to know about. We're not going to be able to explore all of it, but she'll take a few minutes just to give us kind of the lay of the land, an understanding about some of the copyright issues we need to be informed about, that we need to know about, before we start engaging with the nature of this specific topic. So let me turn it over to my colleague, and let's give her a round of applause for this introduction.
Hi guys, thank you so much for coming. So yeah, just a few remarks, little background before the fireworks. So concepts of copyright law can go back many centuries, but copyright law itself was first enacted in 1710 in England. By then, the printing press, which was invented in the 15th century, had really proliferated, and there were a lot of them. And for the first time ever, you could potentially, if you had a printing press, you were able to create copies of books for the first time ever really quickly. And without copyright protection, anyone with a printing press can and did steal others' works and printed them in order to sell them. So copyright law was created to incentivize creation of new knowledge and art, to protect the creators of original works. It gives them the right to control how their work is used and shared for a period of time. It's a no copies monopoly. This encouragement helps artists, writers, and others make a living from their creation. In the US, copyright protection is provided in the Constitution and in federal laws dating back to 1790. Legislation and guidance about copyright have changed a lot over the years. And in modern copyright law, there are 4 key principles. 1, exclusive rights. Copyright has creators, gives them exclusive rights over their work. Almost anything that has been written down or fixed has some level of copyright. So I printed my notes today. These have some level of copyright. Registration. You don't have to register a work with the Copyright Office, but you can. And if you are planning to protect your work or need to, going to fight someone who's stolen your work, you need a copyright registration for the most part. Duration. The monopoly given to creators is temporary. The length of copyright protection has changed over the years, with current laws protecting copyright for the life of the author plus a certain period of time. After that time ends, the copyright expires, and anyone is free to use and share that work, which helps society as a whole because we can spread knowledge and ideas. And then there are international protections. There are a lot of international agreements protecting copyright across different borders. Some of you might be wondering, but wait, I make copies all the time. I downloaded my textbook from some shady website, and I download songs and make copies all the time. Yes, that is technically illegal to do that. It is extremely unlikely that anyone's going to come after you for doing that, but that is illegal. You are depriving the creator or publisher of their income. So copyright, no copies monopoly, right? But there are exceptions to this monopoly, with the most relevant of those exceptions for today's discussion being a concept in copyright law called fair use. With fair use, users are able to make copies of some copyrighted material without permission or payment in limited circumstances, such as criticism, commentary, research, scholarship. But there are clear limits to fair use, and fair use is very complicated. You have to take into account 4 things when you are trying to copy something without permission under fair use. 1, the nature of the work. Is it very artistic, or is it really boring, like a grocery list? How much of the work are you copying? Are you copying all of it, or just a limited portion of it? 3, are the copies harming the income of the creator or publisher? And 4, how you are using the materials. How you are you selling the copies, or are you using it for nonprofit use? And most relevant for this discussion, how you are using the work, is your new work that you have created using a copyrighted work, is it something new? Is it transformative? If it is transformative, it is much more likely to be considered fair. The relationship between AI and copyright law is complex and rapidly evolving, with different countries doing all sorts of different things. Our Congress could develop legislation around these issues, as the EU did with the EU AI Act, passed in 2024. However, in the US, there's been little desire to regulate these AI companies. The Trump administration has shown no interest in it, and no legislation relating to AI companies has ever made it to a vote in Congress. Given the scale of revenue of many of these AI companies, perhaps it is no wonder that it is not getting regulated. So we are left with the courts. The US Copyright Office and the courts have affirmed that some human authorship has to be involved if copyright is going to apply. So a monkey taking a photo of itself, that does not qualify for copyright. And when it comes to AI, things solely created by AI, they've ruled that that can't be copyrighted either. So some human involvement has to be involved. And in that case, the works that use AI but then have a person who is also doing some of the work with that can be copyrighted. However, the case that determined AI works solely cannot be copyrightable was just sent up to be considered by the Supreme Court, so we shall see. There are also tons of copyright cases going on right now involving training AI models. So for AI to work, the systems have to be exposed to millions of copyrighted materials, such as books, articles, art, music, and more, so the systems can learn from that data. Sometimes the AI companies acquire these books and articles legally, and sometimes they do not. The companies creating the AI tools, using the data, are claiming that what they are creating, using all that copyrighted material, is transformative. It's something new. They claim that they cannot be successfully sued because the work is transformative and covered by fair use. The authors are claiming that the AI content steals their copyrighted work, in many cases does not transform the work, but just provides bad copies of it. And that deprives them of sales, clicks, etc., ad revenue, that kind of thing. Whether it is stealing or fair use has yet to be narrowed down. There are lawsuits against Meta, OpenAI, Anthropic, and more. Some cases have sided with the authors and creators. Some cases have sided with the AI companies. And all of these cases are going to be appealed. And with that, I will turn it over to Professor Franks.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you to Alan for bringing us all here together. Thank you to my debate partner Evan. And especially thank you to the audience for attending. So yes, my position is that yes, the use of copyrighted material without permission for AI training is violation of copyright. Before diving into the particulars of any court cases or terms like market harm, I do think it's important to get out some very broad but crucial points. We are talking about both copyright in terms of both non-creative and creative work. However, many of the more famous disputes are about creative work. The Anthropic case, the recent Game of Thrones case, the recent letter from Japanese manga publishers, and so on and so forth. And I suspect that the creative side of things is why many of you are here. And I think that's because we find art to be special, maybe even sacred. And so what I would like to remind everybody is that this is, copyright law isn't just about the ability of artists to make a living, but it's about their participation in the life of society. This is what Hannah Arendt called the vita activa. These are special activities that give life meaning. To strive, they're tasks that we strive to do not just for money, but for recognition, or reputation, or renown. It fulfills that human desire to, in Arendt's words, show who we are in the world. And to some extent, this is reflected in copyright law. Creative work does, in fact, enjoy greater levels of copyright protection than non-creative work, non-fiction, for example. So this is something we need to keep in mind when we talk about things like market harm. For an AI corporation, profit-driven company, the question is essentially about money when we talk about markets. For artists, market harm is broader. It includes things like reputation, recognition, again, that ability for us to make ourselves known. Secondly, you've already heard me shift from talking about AI to AI corporations. You'll hear that a lot. And that brings me to a second very important point. AI appears new, but it does have a long history, longer than we can go into. Early on in the development, when we didn't have the term AI, we talked about machine learning. One of the pioneers of what we now call artificial intelligence, Norbert Wiener, wanted to use the term cybernetics. And some of you probably recognize that term from things like cyberpunk or cyberspace, things like that. But he preferred that term because he thought that the term artificial intelligence would lead us to think about AI as something separate from human activity, so that we can use AI as a scapegoat or a savior. But so what I want to remind everyone here is that AI is not on trial. It can't be brought to court. The question is isn't whether a particular AI, like ChatGPT or Gemini violates copyright. The question is whether the AI corporations like Microsoft or Google have violated copyright. So quickly to the points, as far as unauthorized copying, as Amy mentioned, anytime you make a copy, that's technically illegal, right? In this case, what AI corporations like to do is say that AI doesn't work like human beings. It doesn't make copies in the same way that human beings do. And that's to avoid the obvious massive ingestion, possible storage of copyrighted material in some form. And because AI corporations like to make the argument that that's not like what humans do at all, somehow that's better, right? But on the other hand, to gain access to that fair use in terms of transformative work, AI corporations often argue that what AI does in terms of learning is actually very much like what humans do. That is, it's a process analogous to how humans learn from reading books, right? That's what an AI is doing when it's being trained. I'm not proposing that we can resolve the issue of whether AI learns like a human being or not. What I'm arguing is that we shouldn't let AI corporations get away with trying to have it both ways. Okay, so market harm. Key point here, and in many of these cases, they turn on market harm almost as much as they turn on whether something is transformative or not. So obviously, products of AI may compete directly with human creative content. There's the case of the Machine Hallucinations AR artwork that sold for $270,000. But even if AI-created work isn't profitable, the vast productive capability of AI is able to dilute the market and thereby devalues human creative work. Again, AI corporations have been around a long time. AI is their latest product, and it's hard to see where it's going to go, but these corporations have a relatively long history, and they have in the past gained market advantage precisely by devaluing content. That's what happened to the newspaper industry. That's what put a lot of journalists out of work. Okay. And is AI transformative? Courts have said largely it is. I think there's some reason to dispute that. We can get into that later with a question and answer period, but I'll set aside those other points and turn it over to my colleague.
Okay, good afternoon. So I'm here on behalf of all evil computer scientists everywhere to steal all of your data. Just like Professor Reno in the first debate, I get to play the villain today. I get to convince you it's okay. The opposing argument is kind of based around a lot of feel, right? It feels wrong that companies, evil corporations, big corporations can take your things and just use them however they want. I think there's a reframing we need to start with. David is fighting Goliath in this battle, but there is a huge incumbent industry that also doesn't like this. Disney is suing ChatGPT. Disney is suing this. Universal is suing. Like the big incumbent industries are really against change. So it's not just little starving artist against big evil corporation. There's kind of a big corporation versus big corporation, but it's incumbent industry versus new innovative technology. And that's one of the fundamental things in copyright laws. It's supposed to protect the ability to go create something new. We shouldn't be just saying what we have is good enough. We shouldn't let kind of capitalism dictate the market and not move on to the next thing. We need ways to take what we have now and use it and build on it to get to the next thing. Before I get into my argument, which is really going to be based around going through the 4 points of fair use. So Amy brought up fair use. It is very complicated. She kind of hinted at them. I kind of want to explain why I think they fall on my side. Before that, I want to just talk briefly about how AI works. We're kind of hand-waving ourselves through this a lot, right? This is not necessarily a technical deep dive, but there's this idea that AI is reading a book and the book stays in the AI. And that's not what's happening. It's a bunch of little statistical mathematical knobs that you're tuning in. You're saying, well, this is going to make this prediction better, right? AI, I do agree with your point that it's kind of a misnomer. We say AI to be this catch-all, but we really mean large language models. We mean these artifacts, big monolithic things like ChatGPT. But all they're doing is predicting the next word, given a bunch of words as input. And all that they're doing in training is taking all that copyright data and using it to adjust their parameters on how to predict different things. So they're not copying data. They're using data, and they're storing it as these weights, which is distinctly not human-like, because I don't think in terms of statistical weights and predicting what I'm going to say yet next. But there is a pattern matching, aspect to this. There is something that is human-like about it. Okay, so let's go through the 4 points of fair use, the 4 pillars of fair use, as the courts like to call them. So the first factor is purpose and character of use. So this is the one Amy very explicitly said. This is about transformative use. This is how different is what you're doing with the data. So what we're doing with data here is we're ingesting it and we're training a model. We are building, I'm using your book or someone else's book or all these copyrighted books, and I am generating new statistics. I am generating a new different thing, right? If I go build UMW GPT, it's going to be not the material that went into it. It's going to be this AI artifact. It's completely different. This is something that has been kind of recognized in a lot of the landmark cases so far, that there is this big difference. There have been a couple quotes that have come out that kind of say things like, this is one of the most transformative uses we're going to see in our lifetimes. That was the judge in the Bartz versus Anthropic case, I think. The judge in the Anderson versus Stability case also kind of added that AI adds something new with a further purpose. Okay, that's our first point. The second point is the nature of the copyrighted work. So this is an aspect I had no prior knowledge on. But this is getting into that courts really like to protect things that are either unpublished or obtained in some nefarious evil corporation way. This ultimately isn't about should corporations be allowed to do things that are maybe morally questionable or against the law, but there are laws to protect taking pirated works. We shouldn't be able to, OpenAI shouldn't be able to go illegally download a bunch of books, but they should be able to use books as they are, right? So as long as we kind of police the companies within the confines of the law as it is, this should be on the side of the negative. The next is about the amount and the substantiality of what's used. And this is one where there is clear case precedent. So there was a big case between the Authors Guild and Google Books. When Google Books was updating their search engine, they ingested, I think, 20 million complete copies, presumably obtained legally. I think that was a big point of contention. But the courts ruled that that was fair use. Using all of that data is completely fine because the ultimate thing that you're coming out with is different. You're not producing a full book. You're producing a snippet. You're adding those books in, and you're ending up with a search engine or an indexed tool. The last one is contentious in a lot of these ongoing cases, and that's the effect on the market. So that's really asking what is different about what's going on. So here, when we build an AI model, that AI model is not being trained to reproduce that novel. It's being trained to answer questions, to provide perspective, to provide analysis. In a lot of ways, that actually might increase the market, right? If I ask it what are the best fantasy books of the last year, it might recommend a book that it was trained on. Really, I think that my argument is just based around the fact that the 4 pillars of fair use, there's a very clear line of thinking about how that aligns with that. You should be allowed to build new things, right? We want new innovative industries to keep popping up. We want the next tool after AI to be there. We don't want it to be stifled. We don't want people to be scared about building what's currently there. So I think that's my time. Yep. Yep. Do you want me to start and let you talk first? Or do you want to ask questions?
Start.
Okay.
Hang on, let me turn my mic back on. There we Okay, so again, as you mentioned, sometimes we want to say that AIs act like humans, sometimes they don't. Not surprising that companies would, and not you personally, but these companies would want to argue that. But do you think that they should be able to argue both sides? And if not, which side should they take? Why should they take that? Could you clarify when we should consider AI to be different? Because it's not copying when it's copying, not like humans. But when it's reading like humans. And so when are these things similar, when are they not?
Yeah, I understand the question. I think ultimately, I do think it's kind of a false dichotomy. I think we're trying to understand what's happening with this really technically complex thing, and we're just using metaphors. Like I'm speaking and saying, I'm trying to explain how something that's completely different works, and I'm trying to help everyone understand. So when it's ingesting data, it's not copying. It is just adjusting its statistical weights. When people say it's human-like in how it recognizes patterns, I think they're just trying to provide a metaphor that allows for people to understand what's happening under the hood. I do understand the complaints, though, right? It is, people do like to argue both ways, but I don't think it's so much arguing both ways as using opposing metaphors to help provide insight.
Yeah. That's fair.
Okay. One thing Amy brought up at the beginning was international law, which is something neither of us really addressed in our our opening remarks. What impact do you think increasing copyright law might have? So if we increase copyright law and we say, hey, OpenAI, you have to pay tons of money to all the authors, does that stifle AI development? Does that make AI development move abroad? Do we lose jobs locally? Does that have an international relations impact?
Well, it certainly would, and I would have to say at the outset, I'm a little techno-skeptical in that one of the things I would say is that digital technology corporations make a lot of big promises and not necessarily, it certainly does change the world, but probably not in the same, to the extent that they keep pushing because, and there's a reason why they do that. If you hype a product, you get more investors, right? I mean, I don't blame them for doing that, but I think we should take the claims with a grain of salt, right? So that, oh no, if we don't do this, the Chinese will beat us, right? But there may be some fairness there, but probably not to the extent as we would not to the extent as we would be led to believe, right? There might be some cases in which if, say, China develops AI that creates lots of creative content, how do we guard against that content flooding into our markets and things like that? I think those are some fair questions to ask, yeah. But as far as how will this impact the international scene, I think that's impossible to answer right now. So. Okay, and here again, speaking specifically about creative, artistic, copyrighted work, and this is actually, I forget one of these early cases about why do creative works enjoy more copyright protection. It's because there's no real urgency about a work of art, right? That is, it doesn't necessarily crash a market not to have a new work of art or things like that. So specifically talking about creative artistic works, why does AI training require the use of this content? What's so urgent about its development that there's a need to allow AI companies to have unrestricted access to this work or to object to compensation for those who create it?
I don't think the argument is specific about those particular works. I think the argument is just the AI model is improved by having more data. So within the confines of what's legally acceptable, I think it benefits the AI company to pursue the largest amount of data possible. Mm-hmm. The way that's currently interpreted, that allows the access to all sorts of art and new creative works. So as publicly traded companies, it's in their interest to do so. But I don't think there's anything particularly pressing about those particular examples.
Right, so in the case of creative works, should we start to make a distinction between copyrighted work that is non-creative, right, and give AI companies more access to that, but kind of hold back on creative content a little bit because it isn't necessarily urgent?
I think you're welcome to suggest that as a potential solution.
Yep.
Do you one more or call it?
I think we've got one more quick question if you have a briefer question.
I don't know how brief it'll be. Maybe try to answer quickly, but we've talked about this a little offline. But if we change copyright law and we say that this is breaking copyright, now maybe we require a licensing fee.
Right.
That, in some ways, suggests that the only AI companies that will survive are the big, monstrous corporations we're all,
No.
painting out to be the monster under the bed.
Yeah.
So, like, how do we deal with that future?
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. And I do, and this is where I would come in and agree with you here, that this would be a deep concern, because I think if we get into terms of licensing, the large AI corporations will flip on a dime and say, all this work must be compensated for. And so, therefore, outcompete any smaller companies, because they can handle the licensing fees and the small companies can't, right? And what's the solution to that? I'm not sure. I think artists would have to pay very close attention to that and then say, maybe to help the smaller companies compete, I'll take the licensing fee from the big guys, but waive the licensing fee for smaller competitors, something like that.
Excellent. All right, great. Well, thanks for those questions. Give them a round of applause. All right, so we have about 25 minutes now for questions and comments from the audience. I'll be on one side, Emmy will be on the other side. Please just raise your hand, let us know. Keep the comments brief, but really you can make a comment or a question if you might have one. Want to go ahead and grab one right here? Actually, I think she's, yeah. Good.
I'll figure it out.
Great.
Thank you. So I had kind of a knee-jerk reaction, Evan, when you were talking about the way that it does the copying, and it's really dialing that kind of like analytical precision. I wonder if you argued against yourself a little bit, because like if I'm teaching myself to do a transformative work and I'm copying Monet's water lilies, I'm not going to be able to paint Monet's water lilies, because the translation between my brain and my hand it's going to go different. I, as a human, am going to make different choices. I'm going to do something different. But if you have that machine looking at Monet's water lilies and it's dialing into the mathematical patterns between these two things, can't it actually be closer to copying the original, because it's not making those creative leaps as it's making that artwork?
So let me quickly take my opposing hat off and say, yes, that's a problem. With it on, you're not training just on that, right? There's no GPT that was trained on just painting Monet's water lilies. So the idea is, if I train it on Monet's water lilies and all these other artists, when you say paint a water lily in the style of this, it's not just doing statistical prediction on the knobs trained on just that one work. It's on millions of works. And do you get something that's similar? Maybe, but you don't get something exactly the same.
Does that conversation change when you start talking about deepfakes, where you're taking a person's likeness and all of a sudden you're explicitly copying their mannerisms or their facial features?
So deepfakes are a whole nother issue. I would argue that that should be covered under a separate law, right? Copyright is about the training. So this is about the creation of the AI GPT monstrosity. You can do illegal bad things with those tools. This is just a tool. So is it legal to train that AI? If I go out and buy 1 million books, can I train it on all those books? I don't know what I think the answer should be, but you're right that there is a problem with mimicking something too closely. A lot of the tools, actually, if you say, write something exactly like this in this style, it'll say, I don't want to do that, or something like that. There aren't a lot. There are some things that GPTs will try not to do, but I guess I agree it's a problem.
Yeah, the reason I said the deepfakes is because I think we see that clearly when it's a person's likeness, but when it's their creative work, we feel more of a disconnect. And so that's why I didn't know where that line is as far as the artwork goes, because if it does seem like a very close translation,
The courts don't either. This is ongoing and in the courts. They referenced a George R. Martin suit. One of the problems now is you can ask it, and they produce something that looks similar to what a next Game of Thrones book might be. Uses the same characters and the same themes, and this isn't decided. This is one way or the other, but this is a factor the courts are looking at.
Right. Well, I would add that the only way an LLM could produce that is if it trained on that copyrighted material. That is, if it's going to,
Oh, I agree.
And so it's producing something similar because it's trained on something similar. So, yeah, anyway.
Great.
I have a question on transformative work. So I use AI to create music, but I create music myself.
Yep.
So I put the music in the AI, but then I can control the dials to determine how much of my original and how much do I want it to transform. So in that case, where does fair use come in if the AI takes my original and gives it to someone else? How do I detect that someone is actually using my work?
So the AI, there's a whole lot of studies. There's a bunch of groups that do studies about trying to recover data out. So no one should be able to get your original out. So if you used your original and you put it in there, even if it was in the training set, you can't get it out exactly. You can get the ongoing course cases now have things that are similar. But they're similar and they are, I would say, maliciously prompted. So for example, it is predicting the next word. If you were to pass in the first 1,000 words of a book, its prediction on the next word, even though it was trained on a bunch of books, it's probably going to be the 1,001st word in that book because it's just close. So if they know a lot about your music, they might be able to get something similar, but it shouldn't be able to. There's a lot of studies kind of backing that up.
So large language models have been trained on like web crawlers, so they'll go website to website. Reddit and Stack Overflow have been really good training sets for these models, and OpenAI has paid both of them quite a lot of money. So my question, I guess, is why does it feel like the large companies are kind of getting treated better than maybe a smaller website that's just getting scraped with no compensation?
Well, I think it does go back to the fact that when you're a bigger company, you can afford it, and I think that's what a lot of this boils down to. And this is one of the reasons I would like to suggest that being very careful about our copyright law can serve as kind of a safety guide rail to keep these larger corporations in line. In the same way that we have, auto companies would like to make the cheapest, most efficient product as possible, right? But we have safety regulations that say, well, you can't just do that, right? In a similar way, I think copyright law can help us if we pay close attention to it and not give them too much leeway. Yeah.
I would add, maybe if I was the program manager for ChatGPT, I would note the landmark cases that are kind of my way-ish, but I'd be inclined to try to get ahead of it. So big companies that might be able to lawyer up and fight me, I'd be more likely to pay or reach a preemptive deal with, whereas the small companies, I think I would just take the risk. Right now, there's no law requiring it, but if you're ahead with kind of a show of goodwill, I think there's something to be said there.
Right, and to just kind of go back to one of the points that I thought was a good point that you made as far as it's kind of Goliath versus Goliath, I would argue that the fact that we don't see any individuals taking on Google or whatnot, it's kind of really emphasizes the fact that really an individual has no shot. You kind of have to at least get to a David versus Goliath because the individual right now is not even on the board. So, yeah.
Other questions? I had a question for our librarian, actually, if you don't mind, and Emmy has the microphone right there for you. When we look at the way copyright is infringed currently, individually, and there are lots of cases of that happening, and now we're talking about shifting really some understandings of copyright. Do you see us moving to a post-copyright world where it really doesn't hold the same anymore? And maybe that's because we've been chipping away at it for so many different reasons over time, or because maybe some of these landmark decisions that'll be coming down will change the way we view copyright. Is it possible we end up just scrapping it entirely? Where do you see it going?
God, I hope not. Copyright law is flawed and very complicated, and yes, many people have been trying for years to make that copyright protection longer and longer and longer. So, no, you can't use the Happy Birthday song without paying me, because I'm going to make sure I'm going to hang on to this copyright for as long as possible. Which makes, of course, it makes it more difficult to share and all of the things that we want to share as people. My feeling about this is that these judges who are deciding many of the cases in favor of the AI, they're looking at this and going, wow, look what this product can do. This is transformative. This is brand new. This is so cool. And they're saying it's transformative, and that's a big, big factor in that fair use. I mean, that's it. A lot of cases have hinged on this transformative thing. So I think the judges are seeing that and not seeing that what these products actually can do is reproduce water lilies or reproduce a George R.R. Martin book. So I think copyright law needs to change. I think there also needs to be new legislation dealing with AI, deepfakes, et cetera. But gosh, I hope it doesn't go away.
So maybe instead of just waiting for whatever happens in the courtroom, it's really going to come down to legislation for re-envisioning what copyright would
I
look
hope
like.
so. That's my hope. I mean, copyright law is in the Constitution. It would be hard to make it go away. So that's my 2 cents.
If I could step in on that, I think you're exactly right, and I think what a lot of these judges have done is confused like massive and efficient simulation with transformation, and I don't think those are necessarily the same thing.
I think we have time for one more question, if there's any other question that we have. Yeah, great. Actually, right up here, and then if we're quick, we'll try and fit both.
You said something about the job market and how the job market will be affected. Could you go into that a little more?
Absolutely. This goes to, and a lot of these cases have been decided not just on the two things that I saw most were, is it transformative? But there were a couple of cases, I don't have them right here, but there were 2 cases in particular where work was judged, the Warhol case, right? Where the work was actually judged to be transformative, but because there was demonstrated market harm, that it has damaged the creator of the original, the artist, right? Even though the work was transformative, it didn't enter into fair use. And I think that's something that we should really pay attention to. I mean, this is one of the problems is that it's hard to tell market harm until it's occurred, right? And so I think that's one of the things we have to watch for.
Did I see one other hand that was up? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Do you mind?
For most of human history, we haven't had copyright law. Yet, we still made things and lots of things. Hannah Arendt, for example, she's writing essentially about the Greek city-state and putting yourself out there. And but they didn't have copyright law. They still made things, all sorts of creative works.
Yes.
I don't understand. Why do we need copyright law?
Well, again, that's a fair question, but I would say that in the society that we have now, we do have to make certain allowances for how we bring ourselves across to our society, right? One of the problems that AI presents and these AI corporations present is their ability to massively control the forum, I suppose, the space. Those of us old enough to remember the early days of a lot of these internet corporations, information wants to be free, right? But distribution will cost you, right? So that's what I would say to that. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, I think we're ready for the concluding speeches from both sides. So we'll turn it over to the affirmative and then the negative. And at that point, we'll have another very quick vote, and we'll be able to wrap up the debate soon after.
Okay. So all right, hang on just a second. Okay, so some closing remarks. So again, AI corporations copying and using the works of individuals without permission, compensation, or even recognition to profit from a product that creates works that can simulate, compete with, devalue, or tarnish that work, specifically because they have used it in the AI training, is a clear violation of both the spirit and letter of copyright law. AI corporations argue sometimes that AI is like a human and sometimes it's not. They can field this argument largely because their AI product obscures their corporate motives, right? And that's really what's the issue here. AI is magical new, AI did it. But again, AI is not on trial. AI doesn't gain profit from this. AI doesn't enjoy fame. Sam Altman and Elon Musk do. So on the pro-AI argument, that tends to emphasize, okay, this is transformative, this is progress, this is the greater good, it's good for markets, it's good for science. And that's that utopian argument that, okay, this is the best thing ever, we've got to go with this. Sometimes they'll argue the opposite. If we don't, we'll miss out, we'll face being left behind, we might face economic annihilation, even literal annihilation from enemy nation states if we don't really get on this AI project, right? But that's because hope and fear are great motivators, and there are, again, quarterly reports to make, right? So, so we should have some reserve and some skepticism about that and take a step back. Digital technology companies have actually been around for some time now. AI is just their latest and greatest product, right? And they've made a lot of promises about what it can deliver. But is food or housing more affordable? Do we have more leisure time with all this new unleashed productivity and efficiency? Are we living longer? Are we happier, right? It's not to say that, that great things haven't been achieved. I actually really like video games, right? But it's a little bit of a mixed bag. And I think that should take some of this urgency out of the way that AI corporations argue, that we really have to not hold back this kind of progress. As far as transformative nature, I would argue that the digital is really all about simulation, not transformation. We could say that, they like to say that AIs read like human beings, but are they really capable of transforming what they read? That is, can they add anything to it? Let's take an example. Say Sarah, University of Mary Washington student. She's read Faulkner's Barn Burning and Shirley Jackson's We've Always Lived in the Castle. She's really inspired by these works. She wants to write a novel that integrates her childhood growing up in Northern Virginia. And all these things come together, and she writes that novel. She calls it I-95, right? Something like that. AI can produce a similar story, but it's not transformative. It can combine and simulate the Faulkner story, the Shirley Jackson story, but then, oh no, I need to have an experience of growing up in Northern Virginia. AI can't provide that. It has to borrow it from somewhere else. So it's going to scour the web, look at some copyrighted material. Maybe it finds Sarah's blog on growing up in Northern Virginia. Does AI actually, is it able to add something to transform that material? And I think that's a real question. I think we've gotten hung up on its ability to simulate and really mistaken its ability to transform. Because in the end, we're not asking AI to make stories about its experience being an AI. We're trying to get it to tell stories like human beings, right? And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Keep in mind, again, on this side, it's not a call to halt AI training. It's not a call to bankrupt AI companies. It's a very modest claim. When an AI corporation uses copyrighted material, especially creative content, for the purpose of generating profit, that work must at the very least be used with permission, acknowledged, and compensated. In short, it has to be treated with respect.
So as we come to the end, I kind of just want to recenter real quick. So we've talked about what AI training is. We've talked about some uses, and a lot of the uses seem to get everyone's hackles up. I want to just focus everybody. What we're talking about is the use of copyrighted material to create the tool. The tool can then do things that are good and amazing or bad, right? The next AI could cure cancer. It could rip off your book. I'm not arguing against policing the use of the tool. This is about, is it legal to train the tool on copyrighted material? And I think the answer is yes. I think we've kind of gone through the 4 points. The courts seem to agree so far. There are some open questions. I'm not trying to shut the door on everything. But this is really an important moment in history, right? We're looking at this new tool. We've had similar precedents in the past, right? We've had the big case that gets discussed a lot is Sony and the VCR, which is a cool analog, right? People were worried that was going to kill TV or kill movies. You can go back farther. Photography was going to kill art. Radio was going to kill music. AI is now going to kill creative work. At the end of the day, copyright law, one of the reasons it exists is to promote the progress of science and useful arts. That's why the Constitution gives Congress the power to have copyright law. This is the next big science thing. This is probably the big science thing of our lives. Maybe for some of you that are younger, you'll live to see something amazing, in 40, 50 years. But AI is a big, life-changing kind of technology. We need to make sure we handle it carefully. So I am in full support of policing the use of these amazing tools. We should protect people, right? Deepfakes may require special, laws. Maybe there's a new set of laws that complement copyright laws. Copyright law as it is today, though, right? We go through the 4 factors of fair use. The biggest and most important one, according to the Supreme Court in 1994, is it transformative? All the judges that see this tool think it's the most transformative thing ever. You kind of brought that up in a little bit of a hyperbolic way, right? Here's some hyperbole. I don't disagree, but at the same time, it is very different, right? We're taking a book and changing it into statistics, and those statistics can talk to you and can do your homework and can do whatever you want to do. In a couple years, it's probably going to change the world completely. We need to find a way to protect that. The way to protect that isn't to say you're violating copyright because somebody could use the tool to do something nefarious. If the corporation downloaded books illegally and pirated books, that's already against the law, right? That's not allowable now. People can't steal. You shouldn't steal. You shouldn't, copy someone's work. These are things that there's separate laws for. This is a new complicated thing, so maybe we have a new law to complement it. But ultimately, training is not theft. It's research. It's progress. It's science. We're going forward to the next level of technology. The law really supports us continuing on that path. There's precedent for this, right? The VCR, the radio, every new technology. So AI training isn't copyright infringement. It's really just the next chapter in what humanity's going to do, right? What's the next amazing thing we're going to go do? And this is one of those things. So it's not legal. It is legal. And it's really important, right? It's something we have to keep up. Okay.
Now, at this point, I think it's time for us to do another very quick post-debate survey. It's again anonymous. Please take a moment to go through the QR code or the link to be able to give us your response and tell us what you think about the issue now after listening to this really great discussion.
Oh, sounds good. So do you want to just, okay. Sounds good.
just take a moment to finish up. Anybody still need some more time? Okay, just another moment. Then we're going to have the debaters give their own positions. They can take a moment to be able to say a little bit about their own position on this. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Amy first to be able to add anything that she'd like to say about this, if you'd like to make any other comments about your thoughts on the issue.
So in one case, the judge sided with the copyright owners in the sense that the company had taken these things illegally. And he made the company pay for that. I can't remember which one it was. And it was $1.7 billion that they had to compensate the authors. The company is valued at $70 billion, so it didn't hurt their bottom line very much. I believe it is copyright violation to use these things without compensation.
Would say a little bit about your own position on this topic. Now you no longer have to represent the affirmative and the negative, but say a little bit about your own position.
I appreciate that. Largely, though, I had the easy job of like defending what I believed to be true. That's not to say I was a little harder on technology than I portrayed myself than I am naturally. I really like video games. I think that's a new and form of art, and I think we wouldn't have that without digital technology. And so I'm less of a techno-skeptic than how I may appear. Although there are some elements there, and I do think in general that AI corporations tend to overplay and push a little bit too much on what we can expect from AI. But largely, I got to argue what I really believed. I'm a writer. I want my book to be protected. That is, if I have a book coming out in March, right? And my concern is that it's not even so much about selling the book, but say it's a good book and it starts to go up, get some recognition, right? Well, AI can be used to produce 50 books like that, right? And it's not just that it hurts my ability to gain money from it. It makes that story lost in the shuffle, right? Again, that participation in society that goes beyond money. Those are the things that make life meaningful, right? And so that's my position. Yep.
I am much more on that side of the table than I get to portray. I think there is some element of it's sort of legal as it is. I think what you were hinting at, I'm in favor of, which is I don't think copyright law as it is set up to deal with something this different. I think it is. I agree with the judges. This is one of the most transformative things we're going to see. But I think it's just too different. I think it is transformative in the copyright law sense. Not that I'm a copyright law expert, so I could be very wrong. The market harm is the very interesting case that's still coming out, and I think it's going to side in favor. I think it's going to be against the big AI companies. However, I don't know that. If it isn't, I wish it was. I think you shouldn't be able to produce something that similar. So I think there is something going on. There needs to be an extra set of laws, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know enough about how to deal with it, but I am not in this seat, personally.
I appreciate that. Very much.
Well, join me in thanking Amy and Matt and Evan for all of the work they put into preparing this debate. Now, just before I let you go, there are a couple of very quick slides I want to show you to compare the results from the pre-survey and the post-survey. This is from the post-debate survey. Do you feel better informed about issues related to AI and copyright? Overwhelmingly so. 5 feeling very informed. So luckily, everybody felt more informed, or almost everybody felt more informed by the end of the debate, which was a real testament to the work that was put in by all 3 to prepare for this debate. The next is, how familiar are you with issues about AI and copyright? This is the post from before the debate, and it shows there's some skew there. It's kind of across the board, and we see that's gone up. People are feeling that they're more familiar with the issues now as a result of the debate. And then the bigger question, how would you vote? If you were to vote now before the debate, would you say that training models on copyrighted works without permission violates copyright law? Toward the left, that's the affirmative side, and more overwhelmingly on the affirmative, with a few over to the right. And we would see that it's not necessarily moved too far to the right, but we do see it's changed a bit, and some opinions have been changed as a result of the debate, which I think is a great testament to the importance of having open discussions and debates such as these. So again, thank you to the debaters, thank you to UMW and the Center for AI and the Liberal Arts for sponsoring this, and thank you to all of you coming at this point in the semester to join us for this event. Thanks.